All right. Last week we talked about the Battle of Jericho and all of that. And then if we look at the balance of the book of Joshua, the book of Joshua is taking us through the journey of how the nation of Israel conquered much of the land that God had given them. And then it talks about the different allotments, which tribe got which land and all of that stuff. So we're going to move on and skip over to let's go to chapter 23 of the book of Joshua. Let me find my right glasses. All right. So in chapter 23, Joshua gives them a charge, right? Joshua is getting old. He's well advanced in years, it says in verse 1, and he summoned all of Israel, its elders and heads, and its judges and officers, and said to them, I am now old and well advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake, for it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. And then he talks about how they have allotted the land to them, and then he gives them a charge to obey the law of the book of Moses and not turn from it, but cling to the Lord. And then in chapter 24, they renew the covenant, and Joshua gives that famous charge that we all should be familiar with in verse 14 of chapter 24. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the people say they're going to serve the Lord. And Joshua says, you're not going to be able to serve the Lord, for he's holy God, and all of that. And the children of Israel, again, say that they're going to serve the God, but we're going to see, because we're going to start talking about the Judges, because the next book of the Bible is called Judges. And so I want to do just a little introduction into the Judges. Who are the Judges? Why were the children of Israel placed under judges, and so on tonight, before we look at some of the, not an exhaustive list of the judges, but we'll look at Gideon, we'll look at Samson, we'll look at Deborah, we'll look at, various of the judges as we go through that. So questions, comments so far before we venture into the book of Judges? All right. So, what exactly were the judges, or who exactly were the judges? Because after the death of Joshua, God no longer raises up one specific person. He now puts the nation of Israel under judges. And the judges are those who are ruling, so to speak, the nation of Israel. We're going to delve into that in just a minute. The judges end, the time period of the judges end. So, all right, the next three books of the Bible are Judges, Ruth, and Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, right? Ruth is in the middle of these two books because the story of Ruth happens during the time of the Judges. So the time of the Judges began with the death of Joshua and lasted until Samuel had been raised up by God as the judge of Israel, and the people demand a king, and that's how they got King Saul. We'll get there when we're talking about Samuel. But the judges were God's means of ruling the nation, as opposed to having a king, as opposed to having one ruler like Moses and Joshua after they had accomplished what God had laid out for them to do. Now he institutes this series of judges. And here's what it says in Judges chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up, behold, the tribe of Judah. The Lord said, Judah shall go up, behold, I will give the land into his hand. And Judah said to Simeon, his brother, come up and with me into the territory allotted to me, that we may fight against the Canaanites. And I likewise will go with you into the territory allotted to you. So Simeon went with him. Again, they're not talking about Simeon and Judah. They're talking about the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Simeon. Simeon and Judah have long since passed away. But we read that and we see that they failed to continue the conquest. They gave up what God had told them to do. right? Joshua had led them to victory after victory after victory after victory. And then Joshua gets too old to do it. And part of the charge that Joshua gave them was to complete the conquest of the land. And what we see happens is that they don't quite do that. They leave some of the land up. They don't claim the inheritance in its totality. They leave some of the other people groups there that will plague them in the future. So in chapter 2, in verse 6, when Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years, and they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So after all of the nation of Israel, all of that generation that crossed the Jordan with Joshua, right? So we're 2 generations now removed from the things that God did in Egypt and the things that God did at Jordan, at the Jordan River. So that's what is just said. Joshua and those elders who were with Joshua, who had outlived Joshua, the nation of Israel served God as long as they were alive, but when they died, a new generation arose who were not as familiar or were not as aware of the works of the Lord. So, in verse 11, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals, and they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they went after other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them. Remember, Joshua had told them, eliminate everybody, take your inheritance, drive everybody else out, and they didn't do it. So now they're being adulterated by the nations around them in which they live, and they start going after their gods. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they went after the gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger, and they abandoned the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, and the Lord had warned, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress. Then, verse 16, I said all that to get to verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them, yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. And then so God is angry with them again. And so here is the story of the nation of Israel in a nutshell. The nation of Israel left God and chased other gods, chased the things of the world. They wanted to be like the peoples around them. And God removed his hand of protection from them and gave them over to the surrounding enemies, and the surrounding enemies were able to overcome them, and then they would cry back out to God, and God would send a judge, right? And some of the judges we know, Samson was a judge, Deborah was a judge, Barak was a judge, Samuel was a judge. God would raise up these judges, and these judges had a twofold purpose. They were to lead the people of Israel back to serving God, back to a right relationship with God, and at the same time free them from from their enemies. Right? They were to free them from their enemies and lead them back to a right relationship with God. In that sense, the judges are a type and a shadow of Christ, who would come to free us from our enemies and put us back in the right relationship with God. Right? So all of these things point to Christ. So when we tell a story of Samson, we're telling the story of Jesus in some aspect, some manner, way, shape, or form. But that's what the judges are. They are men, and in one case at least women, that God raises up to free the children of Israel from their enemies and lead them back into a right relationship with God. And so God would raise them up, and they would in essence rule the nation of Israel for God. And God would speak through them, right? So they had a dual purpose. They were prophets, and they were judges, and they were protectors. So, questions about who the judges were before we start looking at one of them? All right. So, chapter 4. Well, we can look at Ehud if you want to, because he's left-handed. And verse 12 of chapter 3. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel. So again, the people of Israel have left God, and so God sends the Moabites against them to punish them. Because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Amorites and the Amalekites, and he went and defeated Israel. So the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Amalekites went and defeated Israel, and they took possession of the city of the palms. The people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So they're in servitude for 18 years. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, a judge, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. And that's integral to the story. He's left-handed. The people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon, the king of Moab, and Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length, an 18-inch double-edged blade. Okay? So, think the sword is not, 30 inches. It's just a long dagger, right? 18-inch dagger. And he bound it to his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man, and when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute, but he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber, and Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat, and Ehud reached with his left hand and took the sword from his right hand and thrust it into his belly, and the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed around over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of the belly, and the dung came out. Then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. So Ehud has tricked the guards. Back in those days, the vast majority of people were right-handed, and they would carry their weapon on the left side. So they're searching for the weapon. There's no weapon on the left side, but he has taped it to his right thigh. Why? Because he's left-handed. And so that's how he's going to draw it. So he pulls out this weapon. He's tricked the king, said, I got a message from God for you. Of course, the message of God from you is your time being the Lord over the nation of Israel is over, and you're going to die today. And he shoves the knife in, and the king is so fat it covers up the blade and covers up the handle and everything. So you can't see that he has been stabbed, and he goes out and locks the door, and that allows him time to escape. Verse 26, Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Serah. And when he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and then the people of Israel went down with him from their hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, follow after me, and for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at that time about 10,000 Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. So God had sent a deliverer. Ehud goes and he kills the Moabite king, and then he leads the nation of Israel in a battle against the Moabites, and they win their freedom, where they had been enslaved by the Moabites for 18 years, and now they have rest and freedom for 80 years. And then we have a little Shagmar. We don't know much about him. After him was Shagmar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. So, everybody know what an ox goad is? Ox goad is that little thing that you poke in the back of the ox to get it to move, right? Typically, it's a long stick, maybe with a little piece of sharpened metal on the end of it, something to give the ox a little prick so that it will cause it to move. So now how he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad is rather astounding feat, right? It just means that God was with him. But that's all we know about this judge that God raised up and saved them from the Philistines. Then we have the story of Deborah and Barak. So after Shagmar, and it says in chapter 4, and the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died, and the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. So the Canaanites now have mastery over the Israelites. Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. So they've been oppressed again this time, 20 years, because they again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now Deborah, verse 4, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. So God had raised up Deborah to be a judge. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, with his chariots and with his troops, and I will give him into your hand. And Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. She said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. So she's a prophetess, and she's the judge that God has raised up, and she tells Barak, I need you to raise an army, 10,000 men, from Naphtali and from Ephraim, Naphtali and who? And Zebulun, and we're gonna bring out the general of the king's army, and you're going to fight him here. And he says, I'm not going to go unless you go with me. And she said, well, you're not going to get any glory for it, because the woman's going to defeat Sisera. And she said in verse 9, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite had separated from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and had pitched his tent as far away as the oak in Zananim, which is near Kadesh. When Sisera was told that Barak the son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with them. Then Harosheth Hagoyim, from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon, and Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him, and the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak at by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army to Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. But Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, so the wife of a friend of his king welcomed him in, said, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not be afraid." So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug, and he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, "Stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand, and then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with a tent peg in his temple. So on that day the Lord subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel, and the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of Canaan, till they destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. So that's the story of Deborah and Barak and Jael. So you can't tell me that the Bible has boring stories, because that certainly is not a boring story. Right? We have Barak, we have Deborah the prophetess, we have Deborah showing more courage than Barak, but Barak nevertheless does what he is called to do. And then we have Jael, the wife of the friend of the king of Canaan, makes a decision that she is going to side with the nation of Israel because God is on their side. And so she treats the king well, and it even says it in chapter 5 is the song of Deborah and Barak. And they celebrate the fact that that Sisera asked for water and she gave him milk. So she was treating him very well and put him at ease, and then drove a tent stake through his temple. So it's the Bible has some strange stories, some action stories, but they're not boring stories. But this is, and we'll get more into depth when we talk about Gideon and we talk about Samson and we talk about some of the others. But that is an introduction to the Judges, which lasts for a few hundred years until we get to Samson. And by the end of Samson's life, David has now been anointed the king of Israel after Saul had been declared the king of Israel. So, questions, comments, concerns? Well,